Why stability can be more powerful than change. Change is celebrated as growth, movement as progress, reinvention as strength. Yet the data tells a quieter story. The bodies that age most slowly are not always the ones in motion. They are the ones allowed to settle. Modern life treats stability as stagnation. Staying put feels risky. Remaining unchanged feels like falling behind. But to understand why stability matters for longevity, we need to look at what constant change does to the nervous system. Every transition, however positive, requires the body to recalibrate. And recalibration, when it never concludes, becomes its own form of chronic strain. Every transition demands adaptation, new roles, new routines, new expectations. In small doses, this is healthy. It sharpens learning, activates repair. But when change never resolves, adaptation becomes strain. The system designed to handle temporary adjustments finds itself in a state of permanent reconfiguration, never settling long enough to complete the processes that depend on continuity. Researchers began noticing that people in perpetual transition showed elevated aging markers. Sleep fragmented, stress responses overlapped. Recovery never fully completed before the next adjustment was required. The pattern was consistent across demographics. Regardless of income, health habits, or access to care, those whose lives were defined by constant transition aged measurably faster than those whose lives offered periods of consolidation. Stability, in contrast, created biological contrast. When roles remained coherent and expectations predictable, stress cycles closed cleanly. The body learned when to engage and when to stand down. The predictability was not monotony. It was legibility, a quality that allowed the nervous system to distinguish effort from rest, with enough clarity to allocate resources appropriately. This did not mean life was easy. Stable lives still contained effort. But effort existed within a frame. Endings were clear. Recovery was trusted. The body did not need life to be gentle. It needed life to be readable, to follow a pattern that made the timing of investment and withdrawal intelligible. What surprised scientists most was how quickly stability exerted its effect. In individuals who shifted from constant change to sustained structure, inflammation dropped, sleep deepened, aging trajectories softened. The speed of the response suggested that the body had not been damaged by change so much as exhausted by it, and that the removal of constant transition was enough to allow recovery processes that had been suppressed to resume. This challenged a deeply held belief that longevity is driven by novelty and optimization. Instead, it suggested something counterintuitive, that staying put long enough to recover may be one of the most powerful anti-aging forces we have. The implication was uncomfortable for a culture that equates movement with vitality, but the biological evidence was difficult to dismiss. And once that idea took hold, the value of stability began to look very different. As researchers followed individuals over longer periods, the biological role of stability became clearer. Stability did not eliminate stress. It organized it. The distinction is important. A stable life is not a stress-free life. It is a life in which stress follows a recognizable pattern, rising and falling in ways that the body can anticipate and prepare for. In stable environments, challenges were familiar. Expectations were known. The nervous system could anticipate effort and prepare for recovery. Stress rose, then reliably fell. The reliability was the key variable. It was not the absence of difficulty that protected against aging, but the presence of a rhythm that the body could trust. In unstable lives, stress behaved differently. New demands arrived before old ones resolved. The system stayed alert, scanning for the next shift. Recovery became partial, fragmented, and inefficient. Each incomplete recovery cycle left a residue of unresolved activation that accumulated over time. gradually narrowing the body's capacity to respond. This difference reshaped aging from the inside out. In stable lives, hormonal rhythms regained contrast. Cortisol rose with effort and dropped with rest. Inflammation activated when needed, then cleared. The oscillation between engagement and recovery was the engine of renewal, and stability was the condition that kept that engine running. In unstable lives, those rhythms flattened. Stress hormones never fully shut off. Repair pathways competed with vigilance. Aging accelerated not because life was harder, but because it was unpredictable. The unpredictability was the toxin, not the difficulty. Hard work within a stable frame produced far less biological wear than moderate work within a chaotic one. What made this especially striking was that stability did not require simplicity. Many stable lives were complex and demanding. The key was continuity. Roles evolved without rupture. Identity remained intact. People who held the same responsibilities for extended periods, even demanding ones, showed healthier aging profiles than people who changed roles frequently, even when the new roles were objectively easier. Researchers began describing stability as biological safety, not comfort, but coherence. The body sensed that effort would be followed by resolution. The word safety, in this context, did not mean the absence of challenge. It meant the presence of a pattern that the body could interpret and respond to efficiently. This reframed longevity again. The question was no longer how much change a life could tolerate, but how often it was allowed to settle. And in a world that rewards constant reinvention, that kind of settling had become rare. The conflict emerges when stability is mistaken for complacency. Modern narratives push continuous evolution. Stay flexible, stay adaptable, never get too comfortable. The language of personal development is saturated with the assumption that stillness is dangerous and that only constant forward motion protects against irrelevance. But biologically, endless adaptation is costly. Systems designed to respond eventually fatigue when signals never resolve. Stability allows the body to switch from vigilance to maintenance. The switch is not passive. It is an active biological transition that requires specific conditions, chief among them the sustained absence of novelty that demands recalibration. Researchers observed that people who resisted constant change aged more gently, not because they avoided challenge, but because they avoided perpetual transition. The distinction between challenge and transition became one of the most important findings in longevity research. Challenge within a stable context is healthy, while transition between contexts is expensive. Those caught in continuous reinvention showed higher inflammation and slower recovery, even when they appeared successful. Their bodies stayed prepared for disruption that never ended. The biological cost was hidden beneath professional accomplishment and social validation, visible only in the markers that researchers knew to look for. Attempts to add stability often failed because they were superficial. Routines changed, but expectations did not. Roles shifted, but identity remained fragmented. The body reads deeper than the calendar. It responds not to what is scheduled, but to what is settled. And settling requires more than routine. It requires coherence across the dimensions of life that the nervous system monitors. Role, identity, the expectation, and the basic question of whether today's effort will be met with tomorrow's recovery. The conflict, then, is structural. Modern life rarely rewards staying long enough to integrate. Success often demands movement before consolidation. The professional and social incentives point in the direction of change, while the biological incentives point in the direction of continuity. And the mismatch between those two signals is one of the defining tensions of contemporary aging. Longevity suffers in this environment, not because people lack resilience, but because they are never allowed to prove it through recovery. This creates a paradox. We push change in the name of growth, while biology slows growth in response. And until this mismatch is resolved, many people will continue aging faster in the pursuit of progress. The climax of this story is the realization that stability is not the absence of growth. It is the condition that makes growth sustainable. When life settles, the body stops guarding itself. Repair takes precedence over vigilance. Systems regain confidence that effort will be followed by resolution. Aging slows not because challenge disappears, but because it becomes legible. The legibility is what matters. A body that can read its own environment invests differently than one that cannot. The resolution is not to fear change, but to respect consolidation, to allow phases of life to mature instead of forcing constant reinvention, to let identity stabilize long enough for biology to invest again. The task is not to eliminate change, but to ensure that change arrives after the previous transition has been fully absorbed, rather than before. Longevity does not reward endless flexibility. It rewards coherence, lives that hold together across time, roles that evolve without rupture, stress that rises and falls within a stable frame. Modern culture treats stability as risk. Biology treats it as safety. And in that difference lies one of the most overlooked forces shaping how we age. When the body feels safe enough to settle, time loosens its grip. Not dramatically, not instantly, but consistently, year after year. Subscribe to join the journey. Why